Well, Damon, Judge Posner says that capitalism itself is broken. You've argued that intelligent regulation, greater governance standards can help rein in some of the alleged excesses of capitalism. And as Amity suggested, the danger to bidding up the price of labor is it could actually deepen the current recession. Your thoughts on where we are and whether there's a new paradigm that's afoot?
Well, first, good afternoon. I guess it's afternoon now. It's always a pleasure to be here at the Federalist Society. I've always found the conversations here to be stimulating and rigorous. I don't doubt that'll be the case for the remainder of the program, although I can't assure you, you have to make up your mind as to whether my contribution meets those standards or not. I want to make just an observation about the nature of the writing of history, which is that and then I want to move on to talking about the present. And my observation about the nature of the writing of history is that all kinds of arguments become possible when the people who had living experience are dead. And now I want to move on to what I have to say about the present. The challenge today, I think, is to deal with four really profound structural problems that our economy faces. And our economy faced these problems before the crisis that just hit. They contributed substantially, some of these problems contributed substantially to the crisis. They predate the crisis, and they continue after the crisis has abated. And I think they are likely to feed future crises, future volatility if these problems aren't addressed. And I think as I go through them, you'll see that they relate very much to the question of the relationship between labor and capital, both in the United States and worldwide, and to the issues of regulation that Stephen mentioned that I've been somewhat involved in. I guess I have to give my disclaimer before I begin, because I think it will touch on some financial policy issues. I'm obviously speaking for myself and hopefully mostly for the AFL-CIO. And I'm not speaking for the Congressional Oversight Panel, its staff, its chair, and so forth. So let me go through these. I've got four big problems in order that I think are really have to be addressed. And I don't think these are terribly ideological, actually. When you come right down to them, people may have different solutions, but the fact that these problems exist, I would hope could be something that people of goodwill could agree upon. The first, in a way, is sort of what Amity was talking about, which is the wage productivity gap. We have a history. I'm not talking about the Depression, but after the Depression. In post-war America, wages and productivity were very closely tied together. Right up to about 1980. They behave very much as your sort of basic economics textbook would suggest they would. Wages, productivity rises and wages rise with it. A very tight correlation. Starting in 1980, those two elements of our economy separate. There's a brief period of reassociation in the late 90s, and they remain separate today. So we saw the greatest increase in productivity in the modern era during the post-war world, but we've seen a very significant one. It's interesting, people think of the great productivity revolution as being the digitalization of our society and the like. It was much greater on a percentage basis during the 40s and 50s and into the 60s. Sort of more fundamental automation issues and the like. The creation of the interstate highway system, jet air travel, so on and so forth. And just a whole lot of sort of detailed innovations in industrial processes and engineering and so forth drove an enormous productivity revolution during that period. And it went right to wages. Now, that stopped in 1980 and hasn't restarted. Some of this is complicated, of course, by healthcare, where healthcare costs have eaten up a fair amount of wages, particularly in the 90s. Now, some people say, well, that shows that, in fact, wages and productivity are linked. But it's not so, because what we're actually getting out of that, what workers are actually getting from that, from those costs, in terms of healthcare deliverables, in comparison with other industrialized countries, is substantially inferior, and we're paying a multiple out of our pockets to get it. So there's a wage productivity gap, and in my view, it is fundamental to understanding the pressures for a leverage-dominated society, the pressures to withdraw funding from vital public goods that underlie economic prosperity, like education, the pressure not to save, right? Because families are trying to maintain or modestly increase their standard of living, as one might expect them to do, and increased incomes has not been available. The debate over the Employee Free Choice Act, over the balance in the bargaining balance in the workplace, over whether or not workers have a voice in our society, is frankly aimed at trying to restore the wage productivity link. But if we don't restore the wage productivity link in some fashion, I think we can pretty much be guaranteed that our political and our economic processes will repeat various kinds of fantasies for propping up family incomes in the absence of wages, which is kind of how you can do it in a sustainable way. Second point, our trade deficit. We run a large structural trade deficit. Its numbers move around a bit. It's down right now because of the weakened dollar, but it's not down in relationship to our single largest deficit-running country, China. The view of the AFL-CIO is that this has something to do with the fact that China's currency is pegged to the dollar, which is, again, very much like the wage productivity link, something that your basic economic textbook would say is incompatible with a functioning world trade system. If your currencies are pegged together, then you don't have trade relationships readjusted to correct for deficits. That trade deficit has to be financed. I would suggest that a structural trade deficit cannot be financed forever, at least not without beginning to seriously impair our standard of living. What in fact has happened is that not unlike a sort of typical merchant on credit, they are financing our deficit. They lend us the money. When we buy more of their goods, run a larger deficit, they take the dollars and lend them back to us. It's all very well and good, except you realize that it can't, as Paul Krugman has said, things that can't go on forever won't. Right? There will come an end to that game. And it's had a little side effect, which is what the economists at the OECD call the compression of global risk spreads. I love that. I was a meeting at the OECD in 2007 when everyone was feeling kind of fat and happy worldwide, and the OECD economic team presented a report where they said basically we're all fat and happy worldwide, everything is great, and then they had a kind of a closed door session with a bunch of technocrats, which somehow I got admitted to, and they said, oh, there's this little problem. It's called compression of risk spreads. Right? And I said, is what you're saying that people are lending money to really dangerous and risky things and getting no risk premium for doing so? Like leverage buyouts and hedge fund investing and subprime mortgages and all that? And they said, yeah, that's kind of what we're saying. And I said, oh, that sounds like a serious problem. Something bad could happen. And I said, why is that going on? What's the explanation for this compression of risk spreads? And they said, global trade imbalances, by which they meant that the dollars that we were spending to buy goods from our trading partners and to buy energy were being recycled into the world's credit markets as part of a currency strategy, and sensibly being recycled as relatively low-risk investments, which funded the compression of risk spreads. Right? Bad things flowed from that. So our structural trade deficit is a problem.